Clause 3, Amendment 3, Lord Hodgson of Abbotts. We can get a move on.
My Lords, this might be entitled What Happened Next. We've moved to Clause 3, which of course is headed reasonable care, and is obviously one of the central issues and concerns we have about the new structure and the equality of arms situation and the position of consumers in the new world. This will, however, not be a static situation, as we've discussed earlier about in codes of conduct. There will be an equal and opposite reaction to what we are doing. The insurance companies must be expected to react to the fact that they can no longer ask open-ended questions in the future, and this may, as a result, drive them to increase the length of the questionnaires they require to be completed. And with all that the difficulties and possibilities of inaccuracies and problems that this may cause. And so the question is, should we be concerned about the issue of reasonable care in respect to this possible development? And obviously subsection 2 of Clause 3 lays out in A to D the four issues that the examples which may need to be taken into account in making a determination as to whether reasonable care has been taken. None of these deal with the length of the questionnaire and the number of questions that are being asked. And this is the background to my amendment. If you are insuring a life for a very substantial sum of money, obviously I think you will wish to ask a very large number of questions about the individual's health and so on. But if you're insuring my car, it's a question of average. I think that that is a different matter. Now, my new best friend, Mr. David Sanders, the Principal Trading Officer in Glamorgan, has had at me again on this one, on the grounds that the issue of motor insurance is spurious, consequential loss will be considerable, and in the case of the Selby train crash, it was reported the claim against the unfortunate driver of the vehicle that caused the crash, Gary Hart, could reach £50 million. Now, I have to say I fundamentally disagree with what he's saying there, because motor insurance is about averages and probabilities. Of course, there are occasions when huge claims take place, of which he's just mentioned Mr. Gary Hart being one, but that is what an insurer would call a 1 in 25-year event or whatever. And they are therefore very rare, and they are not expected or anticipated except on very unusual occasions. By contrast, insuring an individual's life, an individual person's life, it is a highly specific issue relating to their specific health, their age, their genetic inheritance, and when their parents died, and so on. So I'm encouraged to persevere with this argument, with this amendment, because of the response that Lord Justice Longmore gave to a question I asked him on Wednesday, 19th of October, when I asked him about whether we ought not to have some proportionality test. He said on page 16, proportionality is the number of questions being asked. Well, I do not see anything wrong with that. I slightly hesitate because it would be very prescriptive to say that a proposal form may not ask more than 15 questions. It would be an odd thing for an Act of Parliament to say, really, but I would not be against it. Now, what I'm saying here is not that we should say there should be a specific number of questions, but there should be some discretion in deciding whether reasonable care had been taken as to the total number of questions that had been asked. I'm not trying to say there should be 12, 15, 20, whatever. Now, the only serious argument that I've seen in the papers that we've received about this is that actually this is redundant and necessary, because competitive pressure will ensure that people aren't able to put forward long forms and just drive them out of business, because consumers will want to have short forms. Well, it may be. I'm not sure I wish to leave it to that particular chance. What I'm trying to do here is to guard against a future problem. I'm not suggesting my wording again is felicitous, but I do think there is an issue here whereby if we are to have better equality of arms, the size of the questionnaire, the amount of questions being asked, should bear some relationship to the type of risk and the quantum of the risk being insured against, and therefore I beg to move.
The amendment proposed, page 2, line 26, insert the words on the printed list.
If I may, just say this, that the difficulty I feel with this amendment, again, is the one which is pointed out in the ABI letter which we had, namely that in many cases of insurance there are different sums insured, and some cases, of course, the sum is unlimited, and it would be very difficult to know how one would apply this amendment in such a case.
My Lords, again, I'd like to thank my noble friend for his amendment, and I, of course, take as the starting point that I agree that it is undesirable for small, straightforward contracts to require burdensome or excessively or excessive disclosures from consumers. However, I do believe that this amendment is unnecessary, as it is already one of the effects of the bill, as I will attempt to explain. It's, of course, important to say, first of all, and perhaps redundant, but I'll say it anyway, that the factors listed in this clause are merely examples which may need to be taken into account, and the discretion of the court remains unfettered. And, of course, it is important that a wide discretion remains to ensure that the infinite factual circumstances of each case can be adequately addressed, and that the bill remains relevant as the market develops. It is, I think, very unlikely that as a result of the bill, insurers would begin to generate long questionnaires for reasons of their own cost efficiency, not least. And the bill is, after all, only bringing the law into line with best practice, so that the questions that insurers ask as a result of the bill coming into law should not change. Then, looking at one or two of the effects of the particular amendment and the difficulties that it would bring, I would suggest that it is unclear what it is about the questions which must be proportionate. It might mean the number asked, or it might mean something less easily measured about the burden that the questions impose on the consumers. And as has already been identified, but the argument has been used one way by my noble friend and used another way by the noble and learned Lord Lloyd of Berwick, there is this problematic link to the sum insured. Sum insured isn't always calculated. Some policies cover more than one sum insured. It will be calculated differently by different insurers. And of course, the size of the sum insured does not tend to correlate well with what we intuitively feel about the complexity or size of the insurance contract itself. So, to take the example of a car insurance policy, on which generally the insurer needs to ask relatively few questions, nevertheless, as has already been said, relatively few questions, but a policy that covers risks of multi-million-pound personal injury claims and, under the Road Traffic Act, must include an unlimited sum insured for third-party death or personal injury. But on the other hand, one might take the example of an annuity contract, which is far more complex and generally requires much more detailed information for underwriting purposes, but which is highly unlikely to need or to result in cover of the sort of sums that the car insurance policy would result in. So as I've said, I agree with my noble friend that insurers should seek to be proportionate in the questions they ask. The level of time, trouble and care a consumer is expected to take in completing a proposal form should relate to the type of insurance and the way it is sold. But there is no need, I believe, to draft further provisions to achieve this, as it's already included in the effect of the bill. The proportionality concern, I would suggest, is specifically addressed at clause 3.2a, when making a determination as to whether a consumer has taken reasonable care, the type of contract in question and its target market may need to be taken into account. And to take as an example, an insurance product which is advertised as quick to complete, if that had a disproportionately long form, it is expected that might bear on whether a consumer has exercised reasonable care. Similarly, if an insurer who advertised insurance as quick to complete asked fewer questions, but they were incredibly general, the catch-all question problem that's been identified already on the previous clause, this may also bear on whether a consumer had exercised reasonable care. And so taken together, this will mean that where relevant, the proportionality of an insurer's questions is taken into account, and I hope that this addresses the understandable concerns of my noble friend, and I would again request that he withdraw his amendment.
Well, my Lords, I'm grateful for the reassurances my noble friend has given, in particular his statement about the fact that Clause 3.2a does contain implicit within it a proportionality test, which I think was what the thrust of his reason for not wishing to accept what I was proposing. I think that's very reassuring. I think, however, we may just slightly bite the hand that has fed me. I mean, I do think the motor insurance, the case that we're using about it being unlimited for motor insurance is about average. You just take a pool of risks, large number, and some will do mad things and be very expensive. The most will have either no crashes or a small bump. And therefore, it's a different sort of risk, and therefore you're not needing to know a lot about individual cases, not a great deal, but you do need to know a great deal where you're insuring an individual risk, because that doesn't have the average attached to it in the way that insurance does. But that is my just picking at his speaking note, and I beg leave to withdraw the amendment.
Lordship's pleasure that this amendment be withdrawn. The amendment is by leave.